What if I told you that some of the oldest maps in existence contain secrets modern cartographers still can't fully explain? These aren't just faded sketches of coastlines or rough drawings of trade routes. They're puzzles etched onto parchment, hiding clues about advanced knowledge, lost civilizations, and mysteries that defy conventional history. Picture this, a map drawn centuries before Columbus set sail, yet it shows continents no one from that era should have known existed. Or a medieval chart that pinpoints Antarctica with shocking accuracy, thousands of years before its official discovery. These aren't mistakes or lucky guesses. They're evidence of something far more intriguing. For centuries, historians dismissed these anomalies as mere curiosities, but now we're starting to see the truth. Ancient maps are more than just navigational tools, they're time capsules. They preserve fragments of forgotten science, echoes of explorers whose names are lost to time, and whispers of cultures that mastered the art of mapping long before we thought possible. Some of these charts even blend geography with mythology, tracing coastlines alongside sea monsters and celestial patterns, as if the mapmakers understood that the world was far stranger than their contemporaries believed. What were they trying to tell us, and how did they know things that, by all accounts, should have been impossible for their time? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. This journey will take us from the vaults of forgotten libraries to the edges of debated history, where maps don't just show places, they tell stories. Stories of vanished empires, of knowledge passed down through generations, and of civilizations that might have understood our planet in ways we're only beginning to grasp. By the time we're done, you'll never look at an old map the same way again. Because once you see what's hidden in these ancient lines and symbols, you'll realize the past is far more mysterious and far more thrilling than we ever imagined. So let's begin. One of the most astonishing examples of these ancient cartographic mysteries is the Piri Reis Map, a parchment that defies everything we thought we knew about early exploration. Created in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, this map doesn't just sketch the known world of its time, it includes details that shouldn't have been possible. The most shocking, a recognizable outline of Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered for another 300 years. But here's the twist, the map shows Antarctica's coastline free of ice, as it would have appeared thousands of years earlier during a warmer prehistoric era. How could a 16th century navigator have known this? Piri Reis himself left clues. In the margins, he wrote that his work was based on much older sources, including charts from the time of Alexander the Great and even earlier civilizations. Some researchers believe these lost references might trace back to the legendary Library of Alexandria, where ancient scholars compiled knowledge from across the globe. Others speculate that the map preserves fragments of advanced maritime cultures, Phoenicians, Minoans, or even unknown seafaring peoples who might have circumnavigated the planet long before recorded history. But the Piri Reis Map isn't alone. Other medieval and Renaissance charts, like the Orontius Phineus Map of 1531 and the Haji Ahmed Map of 1559, also depict Antarctica with eerie precision. Some even include mountain ranges and rivers that match modern satellite surveys features buried under miles of ice today. Could these maps share a common source, a forgotten tradition of exploration that predates Columbus by centuries? What's fascinating is how these anomalies force us to rethink history. Mainstream narratives tell us that early explorers worked with crude, incomplete knowledge of the world. Yet these maps suggest someone somewhere possessed shockingly accurate geographical data long before the age of modern cartography. Were there ancient voyages that history forgot? Did a global network of traders, scholars, or adventurers exchange secrets lost to time? The deeper we look, the clearer it becomes. Our past might be far richer and far stranger than any textbook dares to admit. The Vinland Map is one of those rare artifacts that blurs the line between myth and history, a tantalizing glimpse of what might have been. Purportedly drawn in the 15th century, this controversial parchment shows a landmass labeled Vinland west of Greenland, unmistakably resembling parts of North America. If genuine, it would mean European cartographers knew about the continent long before Columbus set sail in 1492. But here's where the mystery deepens. The map's existence aligns with Viking sagas that describe Norse explorers reaching a distant, fertile land around the year 1000. Could this be evidence that Viking voyages weren't just isolated adventures, but part of a broader, undocumented era of transatlantic exploration? The debate over the Vinland Map's authenticity is as fierce as a Viking raid. Scientific tests have yielded conflicting results. Carbon dating places the parchment itself in the medieval period, but the ink's composition has raised red flags, with some researchers claiming it contains modern compounds. Skeptics argue the map is an elaborate 20th century hoax, while defenders point to subtle details in the handwriting and wear patterns that suggest an older origin. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Even if the map itself is a later copy, it could still preserve traces of lost knowledge, redrawn from earlier sources that recorded Viking discoveries. Imagine the implications if this map is real. It wouldn't just adjust the timeline of European contact with the Americas, it would shatter it. The Norse settlements in Newfoundland, like Elance Ox Meadows, already prove Vikings crossed the Atlantic. But the Vineland Map hints at something far more deliberate: systematic mapping, perhaps even trade networks stretching between continents. Why, then, did this knowledge vanish for centuries? One theory suggests climate change. The Little Ice Age may have made northern routes impassable, severing connections and burying Viking achievements under layers of snow and silence. What's equally fascinating is how these maps encode more than geography. They're snapshots of a worldview, blending observation with legend. The Vinland Map includes Latin inscriptions describing a land of wild grapes and dense forests, echoing the saga's descriptions of Vinland. It's a reminder that maps were never just about navigation. They were stories passed down by sailors and scribes, mixing fact with folklore. And if even a fraction of these stories is true, our understanding of history is standing on far shakier ground than we thought. This raises a bigger question: how many other maps, now lost to time, once held similar secrets? The Vikings weren't the only ancient travelers with the skill to cross oceans. Polynesian navigators charted the Pacific using stars and currents, while Arab traders mapped the Indian Ocean with startling precision. Could fragments of their knowledge have reached medieval Europe, tucked into the margins of forgotten charts? The Vinland Map, whether real or forged, forces us to confront an unsettling possibility: that the past was far more connected and far more adventurous than our textbooks imply. And if one map can upend history, what else might still be waiting to be found? Take a closer look at the Hereford Mappa Mundi, and you'll see it's far more than a medieval snapshot of the world. It's a masterclass in psychological control. Created around the year 1300, this enormous map doesn't just mark cities and rivers. It weaves together biblical scenes, mythical creatures, and real locations into a single narrative, placing Jerusalem at its center like a bullseye. Every detail reinforces a message. The Christian worldview is absolute, and the Church's authority stretches to the edges of the known universe. Even the monsters lurking at the map's fringes serve a purpose. They symbolize the chaos and heresy waiting to swallow those who stray from divine order. This wasn't just art, it was propaganda dressed as geography. Medieval rulers understood that maps could shape reality as powerfully as armies. By controlling how the world was depicted, they could dictate what people believed about their place in it. The Hereford Map erases entire cultures, shrinking Africa to a sliver while inflating Europe's importance. Meanwhile, the Garden of Eden appears as a real, tangible place, reinforcing the idea that religious doctrine wasn't just philosophy, it was fact, etched onto the very fabric of the earth. But this manipulation wasn't unique to the Middle Ages. Centuries earlier, the Romans used maps to justify their conquests, carving roads and borders into stone to make their empire seem eternal. The Chinese Han Dynasty produced maps emphasizing the emperor's divine mandate, with a capital radiating power like the sun. Even the Aztecs painted territorial maps on deerskin, not just to record land but to intimidate rivals with the scope of their dominance. What's chilling is how effective these tactics remain today. Modern borders still follow lines drawn by colonial powers. Place names honor conquerors while erasing indigenous histories. The difference: ancient mapmakers didn't hide their agendas. They flaunted them, confident that few could challenge their version of reality. That audacity forces us to question every map we've ever seen, not just as records of the world, but as arguments about who owns it, who matters, and who gets to decide. The next time you unfold a map, ask yourself, what's missing? Whose voices were silenced to make this version of the world seem inevitable? Because once you see the cracks in the parchment, you'll realize the most powerful maps aren't the ones that guide you. They're the ones that convince you there's only one path to take. Among the most mesmerizing features of ancient maps are those that seem to whisper secrets of the cosmos. Look closely at the Denderer Zodiac, a star chart carved into the ceiling of an Egyptian temple, and you'll notice something extraordinary. It doesn't just depict constellations. It overlays them onto a map of the Nile, as if the river itself were a mirror of the Milky Way. This wasn't mere decoration. For the Egyptians, the movements of stars and the flooding of the Nile were intimately linked, a celestial dance that dictated the rhythms of life. Maps like these weren't just tools for navigation. They were bridges between heaven and earth, designed to decode divine patterns hidden in the natural world. This cosmic perspective wasn't unique to Egypt. Halfway across the globe, Polynesian navigators crafted stick charts that mapped ocean swells alongside the positions of stars, turning the night sky into a compass. The Marshall Islands wave pilots used these intricate lattices of palm fronds and shells to traverse thousands of miles of open sea, not by following coastlines, but by reading the stars as if they were street signs. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, monastic maps like the Hereford Mappa Mundi placed Christ at the center of the universe, with his outstretched arms touching the edges of creation. These weren't just religious symbols, they were attempts to chart the spiritual hierarchy of the cosmos itself. What unites these traditions is the idea that the earth and sky were never truly separate. Ancient cultures saw them as two halves of a single, living system. The Inca, for instance, built their cities to align with solstice sunrises, turning entire landscapes into astronomical observatories. Their roadways didn't just connect towns, they traced the paths of constellations, embedding celestial knowledge into the very bones of their empire. Even the Great Pyramid of Giza, often studied for its geometric precision, aligns with Orion's belt with an accuracy that defies coincidence. Were these alignments accidental, or did they reflect a lost science that understood the Earth as part of a grander cosmic blueprint? The deeper we dig, the more these celestial maps challenge our modern assumptions. Today, we think of astronomy and geography as distinct disciplines, but to the ancients, they were inseparable. A Babylonian clay tablet might show a city's walls alongside the constellation Leo, suggesting that fortifications were built under auspicious stars for divine protection. Chinese star maps from the Han Dynasty marked imperial borders with the same precision as the movements of planets, as if ruling a kingdom meant harmonizing with the heavens. This wasn't superstition, it was a sophisticated recognition that earthly power depended on celestial order. Perhaps the most tantalizing question isn't how these maps were made, but why their cosmic connections faded from mainstream knowledge. With the rise of modern cartography, we gained unparalleled accuracy in depicting coastlines and mountains, but lost the language that once tied geography to the stars. Could reviving this ancient wisdom offer us more than historical insight? In an age where satellites track every inch of the planet, we've mastered the art of mapping the Earth. But the ancients remind us that true understanding might require looking up as much as looking down, remembering that every line drawn on parchment was once a thread in a far vaster celestial tapestry. The Catalan Atlas sits in a quiet corner of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, looking deceptively ordinary at first glance. But lean in closer, and you'll notice something astonishing: the coastlines of Europe, North Africa, and even the distant Canary Islands are rendered with a precision that rivals modern satellite imagery. This isn't some Renaissance masterpiece, it's a 14th century Portolan chart, part of a family of medieval maps that defy everything we thought we knew about navigation in the Middle Ages. Unlike the symbolic, distorted world maps of the era, Portolans are shockingly accurate, dotted with intricate compass roses and crisscrossed by room lines, a spider web of routes guiding sailors from port to port with mathematical precision. The question isn't just how they were made, it's who taught these medieval cartographers secrets that shouldn't have existed for another 500 years. The mystery deepens when you realize no one knows where Portolan charts came from. They appear suddenly in the 13th century, fully formed, with no surviving drafts or prototypes. Some researchers argue they're based on Roman periply ancient sailing logs detailing harbors and landmarks, while others whisper of Phoenician origins, pointing to that seafaring culture's legendary mastery of the Mediterranean. There's even a tantalizing theory linking them to the lost knowledge of Arab navigators, whose astrolabes and celestial maps were centuries ahead of Europe's. But here's the twist: the oldest surviving Portolans don't just improve on existing maps, they leapfrog over them entirely, as if someone dropped a GPS manual into the laps of medieval monks. Take the Carta Pisana, the earliest known Portolan, dated to around 1280. It doesn't just sketch Italy's boot, it nails the curvature of the Adriatic coast with near-modern accuracy. How? The answer might lie in the chart's most striking feature, those radiating room lines. Modern sailors recognize them as constant bearing routes, allowing navigators to maintain course using nothing but a compass and dead reckoning. But here's the catch: medieval Europe didn't have reliable compasses until at least the 12th century. So who plotted these lines, and with what tools? Some suggest the maps preserve fragments of a lost maritime tradition, perhaps passed down through generations of Mediterranean sailors who guarded their knowledge like state secrets. The implications are staggering. If Portolans really do encode ancient techniques, Roman, Phoenician, or something even older, they hint at a shadow history of exploration, where sailors mapped the world with a sophistication we've barely begun to understand. Consider this: the Catalan Atlas includes details of the Sahara's gold trade routes so precise that historians have used it to locate forgotten medieval trading posts. Meanwhile, the dulcet Portolan of 1339 charts the Azores 2 centuries before their official discovery by Portuguese explorers. Were these lucky guesses or evidence of voyages scrubbed from the record? Perhaps the most compelling clue lies in what's missing. Portolan's overwhelmingly focus on the sea coastlines are meticulously detailed, but inland regions dissolve into blank parchment or fanciful illustrations. This wasn't carelessness, it was specialization. These were working tools, not scholarly curiosities, designed by and for people who lived their lives on the waves. That practicality makes their accuracy even more remarkable. While the Hereford Mappa Mundi stuffed continents into biblical allegories, Portolan makers were measuring distances between ports with an error margin of less than 5%. They weren't drawing the world as they imagined it, they were documenting it as they knew it. So where does that leave us? With more questions than answers, frankly. But that's the thrill of these maps. They're not just artifacts, they're invitations. Every precise coastline, every vanished room line whispers of a time when the sea wasn't a barrier, but a highway, traveled by cultures who might have known more about our planet than we give them credit for. And if a single parchment in a Paris library can upend our assumptions, imagine what else might be waiting in the archives, gathering dust, daring us to look closer. Buried in the ruins of ancient Babylon lies a clay tablet no bigger than your hand, the Imago Mundi, a map so old it predates the height of Greek philosophy by centuries. At first glance, it looks nothing like the world we know, a flat disk floating in a cosmic ocean with Babylon squatting proudly at the center. Rivers zigzag like divine scratches, and distant lands are labeled simply beyond the known. But this isn't just a primitive sketch, it's a philosophical statement, a declaration that the universe had order, and Babylon was its beating heart. What's fascinating isn't the map's inaccuracy, but the worldview it captures. The Babylonians didn't just chart geography, they mapped meaning. The circular design mirrors their celestial observations, the same stars they tracked to predict floods and eclipses. The surrounding ocean, that's the primordial chaos of their creation myths, held at bay by the gods' favor. Even the odd placement of Assyria and isn't random. It reflects political power as much as physical space. This was a map where mythology and monarchy shaped the land as surely as rivers did. But the Imago Mundi isn't alone. Fragments of other Babylonian maps show something even more startling: grids. Tiny, precise lines dividing the tablet into measured sections, like an ancient coordinate system. Some scholars believe these were used for land surveys, proving that alongside their cosmic symbolism, the Babylonians were practical cartographers. They mapped fields for taxes, trade routes for merchants, even canals for irrigation, all with a level of mathematical rigor that wouldn't be matched for millennia. This duality, myth and math, runs through every ancient map. Half a world away, the Chinese Han Dynasty's maps plotted mountain ranges with bureaucratic precision, yet included annotations about dragons guarding sacred springs. The Aztecs painted territories on deerskin, marking tribute routes in crimson dye, but framed them within a cosmic wheel of destiny. These weren't contradictions to their makers. They were proof that geography couldn't be separated from belief. A river wasn't just water, it was the vein of a god. A mountain wasn't rock, it was the pillar holding up the sky. That's why these early maps feel so alien yet so familiar. They remind us that every culture, including ours, maps the world through the lens of its values. Modern GPS strips away the dragons and gods, but the impulse remains the same: to impose order on the wild, to say, here is where we belong. The Babylonians just had the honesty to admit their map wasn't just territory. It was theology, politics, and poetry pressed into clay, and in that honesty they left us a question. What invisible borders and hidden mythologies are lurking in the maps we trust today? The Arctic wind howls across the pages of Gerardus Mercator's famous world map, revealing a land modern geography refuses to acknowledge. Hyperborea. This sprawling, sun-drenched paradise, nestled near the North Pole, defies everything we know about the frozen North. Mercator didn't just sketch it as a fanciful decoration. He placed it precisely, labeling rivers, mountains, and even a central sea, as if he'd copied it from some lost explorer's journal. But here's the twist: Hyperborea wasn't his invention. It was a legend echoing across millennia, whispered by Greek poets, sought by Roman emperors, and immortalized by cartographers who dared to map what they couldn't see. The ancient Greeks spoke of Hyperborea as a land beyond the north wind, where giants bathed in eternal sunlight and illness was unknown. Herodotus wrote of mysterious gifts, wheat and honey wrapped in straw arriving in Greece from this distant utopia carried by unseen hands. Pytheas, the 4th century BC explorer, claimed to have sailed near its shores, describing a place where the sun never set and amber washed ashore like sea foam. Was he lying, deluded, or had he stumbled upon some forgotten fragment of the Arctic, reshaped by time into myth? Mercator's inclusion of Hyperborea in 1569 wasn't a whimsical flourish. He was a meticulous scholar, stitching together the best sources of his age: Ptolemy's coordinates, Marco Polo's travelogues, and accounts from medieval monks. But his map's most tantalizing detail comes from a now-lost manuscript, the Journey of Jacobus C. Noyen, which described a 14th century knight's voyage to the Arctic, where he found a golden race living in a temperate valley ringed by impassable mountains. Mercator didn't just believe in Hyperborea, he had evidence. This raises a deeper question. Why did so many brilliant minds, from Ptolemy to Shakespeare, cling to the idea of a northern Eden? The answer lies in the human obsession with edges. Every culture has its Hyperborea, a Shangri-La, a Thule, a Valhalla, just beyond reach. These weren't just fairy tales. They were psychological anchors, places where the rules of the ordinary world bent. For explorers, they justified perilous voyages. For map-makers, they filled the blank spaces where knowledge ran out. And for rulers, they were propaganda. Elizabeth I cited Hyperborea to justify England's Arctic expeditions, claiming ancient Britons had once ruled there. Even the Nazis launched costly searches for Hyperborean ruins, convinced their Aryan ancestors originated in the Arctic. The irony is that modern science has uncovered truths far stranger than the myths. Satellite images reveal Arctic landscapes that shift dramatically with climate-hidden valleys, ancient forests preserved under ice, even evidence of prehistoric human settlements. Could these be the shattered remnants of whatever inspired the legends? Or does Hyperborea endure because we need it to? A reminder that the map is never truly complete, that there's always something lurking just beyond the edge of our understanding. Mercator's Hyperborea wasn't a mistake, it was a challenge, a dare to look past the known and ask, what if that's the magic of these ancient maps? They don't just show us where we've been. They hint at where we might still go. Unfolding Heinrich Bunting's cloverleaf map from 1581 feels less like reading a chart and more like cracking open an alchemist's notebook. At first glance, it's whimsical, 3 continents shaped like petals, radiating from Jerusalem as if the holy city were the stem of the world. But this wasn't just artistic flair. Every curve and line hums with hidden meaning, a visual incantation blending geography, theology, and the arcane. The tripartite design mirrors the Holy Trinity, while the cloverleaf itself, a symbol of luck in folklore, hints at deeper alchemical traditions, where the number 3 represented the union of body, soul, and spirit. Bunting, a Lutheran pastor, didn't just draw a map. he crafted a devotional object, a meditation aid meant to guide believers towards spiritual enlightenment as much as physical travel. This fusion of cartography and mysticism wasn't unique. Medieval mapmakers often worked like medieval chemists, distilling the tangible and intangible into a single image. Take the enigmatic zonal maps of the Middle Ages, which divided the world into horizontal bands representing not just climate, but stages of spiritual ascent. The torrid equatorial zone, marked uninhabitable by scholars, doubled as a metaphor for the soul's trials a fiery purgatory one had to cross to reach the temperate lands of divine grace. Even coastlines weren't safe from symbolism. On some charts, rivers forked deliberately into tridents, echoing Neptune's weapon, but also the alchemical sign for water, one of the four classical elements believed to underpin all creation. The most tantalizing clues lie in the margins. Bunting's map is littered with tiny annotations in Latin, not just labeling cities but invoking biblical prophecies. Near Babylon, a minuscule dragon coils not a decoration, but a nod to the apocalyptic beast of Revelation. In the oceans, ships sail alongside sea monsters labeled Leviathan and Behemoth, creatures that medieval mystics associated with cosmic chaos. These weren't warnings to sailors, they were reminders that the world was a battleground between divine order and primordial chaos, a theme straight out of alchemical texts where the artist's pen was as much a tool of transformation as the philosopher's stone. What's striking is how these maps reflect a world where science and spirituality weren't opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin. The same compass that plotted trade routes could trace the geometry of sacred architecture. The same ink that marked mountain ranges might encode the stages of the magnum opus, the alchemical quest to turn lead into gold, or the soul into something divine. Scholars now suspect some cartographers belonged to clandestine guilds or monastic orders that guarded esoteric knowledge. The famous Hereford Mappa Mundi, for instance, includes a labyrinth near Jerusalem, identical to those found in Gothic cathedrals, secret symbols for spiritual pilgrimage. Yet the biggest mystery isn't what these maps hide, but why their layered meanings faded. As the Enlightenment prioritized empirical accuracy, maps shed their mystical skin, becoming sterile tools of navigation. We gained precision but lost the poetry, the idea that a map could be a portal to higher understanding. Today, we're left to piece together the puzzles Bunting and his peers left behind, wondering if their errors were really ciphers waiting to be read. After all, if a cloverleaf can remake the world in the image of faith, what other secrets might still lie curled in the parchment, waiting for the right eyes to see them? The Zeno map is the kind of puzzle that keeps historians awake at night. Published in 1558 by Venetian nobles Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, this controversial chart claims to document a 14th century voyage to the North Atlantic, decades before Columbus. At first glance, it's a mess of misshapen islands and garbled names, with places like Estatiland and Drogeo scattered where Greenland and Newfoundland should be. Skeptics argue it's an elaborate 16th century forgery, cobbled together from sailors' tall tales to boost the Zeno family's prestige. But what if there's more to the story? The map's defenders point to eerie consistencies with real geography. Estatiland, described as a wooded land with advanced towns, bears a striking resemblance to Norse accounts of Markland, a territory the Vikings visited around the year 1000. Drogeo, labeled as a place where inhabitants lived in caves and hunted with bows, aligns with descriptions of the Beothuk people of Newfoundland. Even the map's odd distortions make sense if you consider medieval navigation methods. Sailors often recorded coastlines based on sailing times, not precise measurements, which could stretch or compress landmasses in unexpected ways. Then there's the matter of the Phantom Islands. The Zeno map shows Friesland, a landmass that doesn't exist, yet appears on dozens of other maps for centuries. Some scholars think it's a misrecorded sighting of the Faroe Islands, while others believe it represents a now submerged volcanic shelf. But here's the twist: 16th century fishermen swore by Friesland's existence, even reporting its coordinates. Could it have been a real place that vanished due to rising seas or geological shifts? The map might not be lying, just preserving a lost reality. The most tantalizing clue lies in the Zeno brothers' own writings. They claimed their ancestor, the explorer Niccolò Zeno, sailed with a mysterious prince named Zichmni, who ruled islands near the Arctic. No other records mention this prince, but his name echoes the Norse Sigurd, and his described territory matches parts of Shetland and Orkney regions with strong Viking ties. If the Zenos were recounting a garbled but genuine Norse-led expedition, it would rewrite the history of transatlantic contact. What's fascinating is how the debate reflects a deeper tension in cartography. Maps aren't just facts, they're stories, filtered through the biases and knowledge of their makers. The Zeno map might blend real voyages with myths, but so did many accurate charts of its era. Even Ptolemy's ancient maps included legends like the Mountains of the Moon, yet we don't dismiss his entire work as fiction. Perhaps the real question isn't whether the Zeno map is entirely true, but what fragments of truth it might still hold. Consider this: in the 1960s, archaeologists found Norse artifacts in Maine, a pewter ring and a coin dating to the 11th century. If the Vikings really traded that far south, who's to say other European expeditions didn't follow, leaving traces in maps we've hastily labeled as hoaxes? The Zeno map reminds us that history's edges are frayed, and sometimes the most outrageous claims are just waiting for the right evidence to resurface. After all, Vinland was once a myth too, until someone dug up a Viking longhouse in Newfoundland. So before we dismiss the Zenos as liars, maybe we should ask, what else might we be missing? Dragon fins slice through inked waves on the Carta Marina, their coiled bodies framing coastlines like guardians of the unknown. To modern eyes, these creatures seem whimsical fantasy intruding on geography. But in 1539, when Swedish ecclesiastic Olaus Magnus drafted this masterpiece of maritime terror, every serpent and many-armed beast served a purpose. They weren't just filling blank spaces, they were translating real dangers into visual code. The colossal lobster crushing a ship near Norway, a warning about treacherous whirlpools. The fire-breathing sea swine off Germany's coast, likely inspired by sailors' accounts of bioluminescent algae igniting night waters, a phenomenon science wouldn't explain for centuries. This symbology wasn't unique to Europe. Half a world away, Chinese Admiral Zheng, his navigation charts marked the Dragon Sea with serpentine borders, where waves were said to rise like angry gods. Arab Portolan sketched giant rocks clutching elephants in their talons near the Indian Ocean, echoing Sinbad's legends while cautioning against monsoon winds. Even the Polynesian stick charts, minimalist by comparison, embedded shark teeth patterns where currents turned deadly. These weren't arbitrary choices. They were survival manuals disguised as art, blending observation with oral tradition to create maps that spoke to both the hands and the imagination. But the monsters did more than warn, they defined the limits of knowledge. Medieval cartographers followed a simple rule: if no reliable traveler returned from a region, it became a canvas for speculation. The famous "Here be dragons" phrase rarely appeared on actual maps, but the sentiment permeated them. Blank spaces threatened the medieval mind. Nature abhorred a vacuum as much as philosophy did. So mapmakers populated voids with creatures from bestiaries, turning terra incognita into a theater of the fantastic. The Carta Marina's Iceland, for instance, features a fire demon hurling boulders, a clear nod to volcanic eruptions no European had witnessed but all feared. What's fascinating is how these illustrations mirrored societal anxieties. The surge of sea monsters during the age of exploration coincided with rising fears of the other. As European powers ventured into new worlds, maps became propaganda tools, painting foreign waters as domains of chaos needing taming. The kraken, first drawn swirling near Greenland, grew in size as whaling prophets soared, becoming a metaphor for both natural and economic peril. Even benign creatures like mermaids carried coded messages, their hybrid forms reflecting unease about cultural mixing in colonial outposts. Today's maps seem sterile by comparison, but the instinct persists. Modern navigation apps use icons for hazard skulls marking riptides, lightning bolts signaling storm zones. Satellite images reveal ghostly shipwrecks on ocean floors, their outlines eerily reminiscent of those inked galleons devoured by serpents. The difference: we've swapped mythology for data, yet the underlying message remains. Here lies danger. Perhaps the old mapmakers were onto something. Their monsters made the unknown feel tangible, transforming fear into something you could point to and name. In an age of GPS precision, we've gained accuracy but lost that visceral connection, the understanding that every map is ultimately a story, and every edge of the page whispers of wonders and terrors yet to be charted. The Fra Mauro map doesn't just depict the world, it shatters the illusion that medieval Europe operated in isolation. Crafted in Venice around 1450 by the monk Fra Mauro, this sprawling, circular masterpiece stitches together knowledge from merchants, diplomats, and scholars across 3 continents. Look closely at its rendering of Africa, and you'll see the Nile branching symmetrically like a candelabra, a detail borrowed directly from Arab geographers. The Indian Ocean isn't landlocked, as Ptolemy claimed, but open and navigable, a fact known to Gujarati sailors for centuries. Even the map's orientation is revolutionary. South sits at the top, a perspective common in Islamic cartography but alien to European eyes. This wasn't just a map, it was a testament to conversations happening along the Silk Road, across the Indian spice trade, and in the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. What's striking is how deliberately Fra Mauro credited his sources. In tiny script alongside mountain ranges and rivers, he cites a trusted Moorish traveler or a Persian merchant's account. These annotations reveal a web of cross-cultural exchange that historians are only beginning to unravel. Take his depiction of the African kingdom of Prester John, a legendary Christian ruler Europeans had sought for centuries. Fra Mauro's version isn't the usual fairy tale. He places the kingdom in Ethiopia, citing Ethiopian monks who visited Venice, and includes details about its copper mines and cathedral cities that match modern archaeological finds. This wasn't guesswork, it was global intelligence gathered through networks stretching from Cairo to Canton. The map's treatment of Asia is even more revealing. Java appears as a sprawling island with 9 kingdoms, information likely gleaned from Chinese treasure voyages under Admiral Zheng He. Japan, labeled Sipangu, is positioned with surprising accuracy, suggesting access to nautical charts from Okinawan or Korean traders. Most astonishing is the inclusion of a landmass southeast of Africa labeled Diab. Some scholars argue this could be Madagascar, while others see hints of Antarctic coastlines recorded by forgotten explorers. Whatever the truth, Fra Mauro's willingness to include contested knowledge speaks volumes. His map wasn't a declaration of absolute truth, but a living document, updated as new voices contributed. This collaborative spirit challenges everything we've been taught about the Age of Discovery. While textbooks focus on European pioneers like Columbus and Magellan, the Fra Mauro map proves that accurate geography depended on non-European expertise. Arab astrolabes measured latitudes, Indian navigators explained monsoon patterns, and African caravans mapped gold routes. Without these contributions, Europe's so-called explorers would have been sailing blind. The map even hints at shared myths. Note the Island of Satan near Scandinavia, a near-identical concept to the Islamic Jazirat al-Shaitan in the Indian Ocean. Coincidence or evidence of stories exchanged along trade routes? Perhaps the map's greatest lesson lies in its humility. Fra Mauro famously inscribed near its edge, "I do not think it derogatory to Ptolemy if I do not follow his cosmography, because to observe the meridians or parallels or degrees, I must sacrifice proportion." In other words, when reality clashes with authority, trust reality. That ethos feels startlingly modern. In an era where maps were often tools of conquest, this monk created one that honored collective wisdom. It's a reminder that borders are imagined, but knowledge has always flowed freely if we're willing to listen. The real mystery isn't what the Fra Mauro map shows. It's how much history we've missed by refusing to see the world through its inclusive lens. The Gangnedo map, painted on silk in Korea in the early 15th century, doesn't just chart kingdoms, it freezes a moment in Earth's ecological history. Look closely at its rendering of the Yellow River, and you'll notice something startling. The waterway follows a path radically different from today's. Centuries of floods, human engineering, and deforestation have reshaped its course, but here, preserved in mineral pigments, lies a snapshot of the river as it once was. This isn't an isolated case. From the shifting deltas of the Nile on Ptolemy's maps to the vanished forests of medieval Europe marked in monastic atlases, ancient maps are time capsules of lost landscapes. They record coastlines eroded by rising seas, deserts that were once grasslands, and trade routes that vanished when wells dried up. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're datasets waiting to be decoded. Environmental scientists are beginning to mine these artifacts for clues. Take the Posterior map of the Alps, drawn in 1620. Its meticulous notation of glacier boundaries aligns with ice core samples showing rapid retreat during the Little Ice Age. Or the Mughal Empire's revenue maps, which documented crop yields alongside river levels, offering a granular view of how monsoon patterns fluctuated before industrialization. Even the seemingly fantastical has value. Medieval European maps that labeled the Sahara as the Green Land might preserve folk memories of the African humid period when the desert was a savanna teeming with life. What's revolutionary is how these records challenge modern climate models. Scientists studying the Gangnedo map's river systems have found evidence of a wetter, more stable climate in pre-colonial East Asia data that contradicts assumptions about natural drought cycles. Similarly, Venetian Portolan charts from the 14th century show salt marshes that have since drowned, providing benchmarks for measuring sea level rise. The implications are profound. If a map from 600 years ago can fill gaps in our understanding of erosion or rainfall patterns, how many other ecological insights might be hiding in plain sight? The real power of these maps lies in their perspective. Unlike modern satellite images, which capture a single moment, ancient cartography often reflects cumulative knowledge generations of observations passed down and refined. The Gangnedo map's depiction of Southeast Asia's mangrove forests, for instance, matches pollen records showing their gradual decline due to early agricultural expansion. It's a reminder that human impact on the environment isn't a recent phenomenon. It's a story written across centuries, and these maps hold the key to reading it. Now consider this: if cartographers could inadvertently predict the past, could they also have hinted at the future? The next chapter of our journey takes us to maps that seemed like fiction until science proved them right. From phantom islands confirmed by sonar to mountain ranges hidden under ice, these documents didn't just record the world as it was, they foresaw discoveries waiting to be made. Claudius Ptolemy never set foot on a ship, never gazed at the horizon from a distant shore, yet for over 1,000 years, his vision of the world was law. In the 2nd century, this Alexandrian scholar compiled maps so precise, so mathematically elegant, they became the foundation of Western geography. But elegance isn't accuracy. Ptolemy's Earth was too small, his Asia stretched impossibly wide, and his Indian Ocean sealed shut like a locked box. These weren't minor flaws. They were tectonic errors that warped exploration for centuries. So why did generations of cartographers, even as new lands emerged, treat his work as gospel? The answer lies in the seductive power of system. Ptolemy didn't just sketch coastlines, he built a framework. His maps used a grid of latitudes and longitudes, calculated with celestial observations and geometric formulas. To Renaissance scholars rediscovering his texts, this wasn't just cartography, it was cosmic order. When navigators like Columbus found discrepancies, they assumed their measurements were wrong, not Ptolemy's. After all, how could a man who predicted star positions so precisely misjudge Earth's scale? The irony is crushing. Columbus miscalculated his route to Asia precisely because he trusted Ptolemy's shrunken globe, stumbling into the Americas by accident. Yet the real mystery isn't the errors, it's their endurance. Long after Portuguese caravels proved Africa could be rounded, maps still showed Ptolemy's landlocked Indian Ocean. The 1492 Nuremberg Chronicle, printed the very year Columbus sailed, recycled his ancient geography unchanged. This wasn't ignorance, it was institutional inertia, the weight of tradition pressing down on progress. Universities taught Ptolemaic cosmology as fact. To challenge it risked heresy. Even when Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis incorporated New World discoveries into his charts, he felt compelled to cite Ptolemy as an authority, grafting radical new knowledge onto old frameworks. What's fascinating is how these maps reveal science's blind spots. Ptolemy himself urged readers to update his work with new data. But somewhere between Alexandria and the age of exploration, his maps hardened into dogma. The lesson isn't just about flawed geography, it's about how easily systems meant to organize knowledge can become cages. For every explorer who questioned Ptolemy, there were a dozen scholars who dismissed living witnesses in favor of ancient texts. The same pattern repeats through history, from doctors clinging to Galen's anatomy long after dissections proved it wrong, to astronomers resisting Galileo's telescopes because Aristotle hadn't mentioned lenses. Perhaps the most poignant legacy of Ptolemaic maps lies in their margins. In libraries across Europe, you'll find editions with handwritten corrections, navigators' annotations, straining to reconcile reality with the grid. These scribbles are more than amendments, they're the sound of a worldview cracking. By the time Mercator drafted his famous projection in 1569, Ptolemy's influence was fading, but his shadow lingered. Even today, our maps bear traces of his choices: the exaggerated size of Europe, the skewed proportions of the tropics. The past never truly vanishes, it just layers itself beneath the parchment, waiting for someone to peel it back. The Oronce Map of 1531 doesn't just depict the world, it reshapes it into a work of art, a heart symbolizing the unity of human knowledge. At first glance, its graceful curves and intricate calligraphy seem purely decorative, but look closer, and you'll notice something astonishing. A vast southern continent labeled Terra Australis, stretching across the bottom of the globe like an anchor holding the Earth in place. This wasn't artistic license. Finlay, a mathematician and astronomer, insisted his work was grounded in ancient texts and navigational lore. But here's the twist. No European had sailed far enough south to confirm such a landmass existed. So why did this phantom continent appear on maps for centuries, shaping the voyages of explorers from Magellan to Cook? The answer lies in a blend of logic and legend. Since antiquity, scholars believed symmetry governed the universe. If there were massive landmasses in the northern hemisphere, the south must balance them. Ptolemy himself speculated about a terra incognita, and medieval geographers filled manuscripts with theories about its riches, but Finlay's version went further. His Terra Australis wasn't just a placeholder, it was detailed with mountain ranges and rivers, as if copied from a lost explorer's journal. Some historians argue he drew from secret Portuguese charts, as Lisbon tightly guarded discoveries to monopolize trade. Others point to Marco Polo's account of a land of gold south of Java, a possible misinterpretation of Australia's northern coasts. What's fascinating is how Finlay's fiction influenced reality. When James Cook set sail in 1768, his secret orders included searching for Terra Australis, a mission that ultimately led him to circumnavigate New Zealand and map Australia's eastern shores. Even after Cook proved no massive southern continent existed, the myth lingered. Maps continued to sketch fragments of Antarctica in Finlay's style, unable to let go of the elegant symmetry he'd envisioned. This obsession with Terra Australis reveals a deeper truth about cartography. Maps are as much about desire as discovery. They don't just record what's there, they reveal what we hope to find. The same impulse that placed El Dorado in South America or the Fountain of Youth in Florida also conjured Finlay's southern Eden. And while modern science has stripped away these fantasies, something vital was lost in the process. The old mapmakers understood that exploration isn't just about coordinates, it's about wonder. Consider how many false lands guided real journeys. The phantom island of Hyperborea haunted Atlantic charts for centuries, sending ships like John Cabot's veering off course in search of its fabled mists. The mythical Strait of Anian, a supposed Northwest Passage shortcut, lured countless crews to icy graves. Even the Zeno map's Friesland, though non-existent, appeared so consistently that 18th century navigators reported, citing its cliffs in the fog. These weren't mere mistakes, they were compass points for the human imagination, proving that sometimes the most powerful maps are the ones that lead us astray. Finlay's heart-shaped masterpiece endures because it captures this duality. Its curves embrace both the rigor of mathematics and the thrill of the unknown, reminding us that every explorer needs two things, a chart to follow and a dream to chase. And who's to say which is more important? After all, if we only mapped what we could see, we'd still believe the world ended at the horizon. Long before European explorers relied on compasses and sextants, Polynesian navigators were crossing thousands of miles of open ocean with nothing but the stars, the swell of waves, and the flight patterns of birds as their guide. These weren't just lucky voyages, they were feats of precision cartography, using a system so sophisticated it could pinpoint tiny islands in the vast Pacific with uncanny accuracy. Take the Marshall Islands stick charts, for example. At first glance, these intricate lattices of palm fronds and shells look like abstract art, but to trained navigators, they were living maps. Curved reeds represented ocean swells, while small cowrie shells marked the positions of atolls. The charts weren't physical representations of the sea. They were dynamic diagrams of wave interference patterns, teaching sailors how to read the ocean's pulse like a musical score. This knowledge wasn't written down in logbooks or engraved on parchment. It was encoded in chants, stories, and the muscle memory of generations. Inuit elders in the Arctic similarly passed down mental maps of ice flows and migratory routes through oral tradition, their narratives so precise they could guide hunters through blizzards where modern GPS would fail. The Inuits' ability to interpret wind-carved snowdrifts or the slight discoloration of sea ice signaling thin spots wasn't just survival skill. It was a form of cartography as detailed as any medieval Portolan, yet dismissed for centuries as mere folklore. What's revelatory is how these systems turned the natural world into a living atlas. Polynesian navigators didn't just memorize star paths. They understood how the night sky shifted with latitude, using the rising and setting of specific stars as invisible latitude markers. The Maori of New Zealand carved topographic maps into wood, with spirals representing ocean currents and notches marking sacred peaks. Even the Aboriginal peoples of Australia painted songlines on bark maps that blended geography with ancestral stories, where every waterhole and mountain was a verse in a navigational epic. These weren't just directions, they were mnemonics weaving land and memory into an unbroken thread. Yet for all their brilliance, these traditions were systematically erased. European colonizers, convinced their own methods were superior, often banned indigenous navigation practices, labeling them as primitive superstition. The tragic irony, many so-called discoveries by Western explorers were only possible because of indigenous guides who shared their knowledge under duress. Tupea, a Tahitian navigator, famously helped Captain James Cook chart the Pacific, yet his contributions were relegated to footnotes. The same pattern repeats across history, from the Inuit who mapped the Northwest Passage for Franklin's doomed expedition to the Navajo code talkers, whose language became an unbreakable cipher in World War II. Today, there's a growing movement to reclaim these lost cartographic legacies. Modern sailors are relearning Polynesian wayfinding to reduce reliance on technology, while climate scientists collaborate with Inuit hunters to track Arctic ice melt using traditional indicators. Even NASA has studied Aboriginal astronomy for insights into celestial navigation. Each rediscovery chips away at the myth that cartography was a European invention, revealing instead a tapestry of global innovations as diverse as the cultures that created them. So the next time you unfold a map, remember, the lines on parchment are just one way to chart the world. Beyond the grids and meridians lie songs that can guide you across deserts, sticks that whisper the language of waves, and stars that remember paths older than compasses. These aren't just alternatives to Western cartography. They're proof that the art of mapping is as boundless as human imagination. And if we've only just begun to recognize their value, what other navigational wisdom might still be waiting, unbroken, in the voices of elders and the rhythms of the land? The Waldseemüller map of 1507 is more than just a historic first, it's a cartographic bombshell. At first glance, its most famous feature jumps out, the word America scrawled across what we now call South America, the earliest known use of the name on any map. But that single label is just the beginning of its mysteries. The map doesn't just honor Amerigo Vespucci, the Florentine explorer whose voyages suggested this was a new continent, not Asia. It also dares to depict the Pacific Ocean a full 7 years before Vasco Núñez de Balboa became the first European to lay eyes on it. How could Waldseemüller and his team, working in a small town in what's now France, have known about an ocean that, by all official accounts, hadn't been discovered yet? The answer might lie in the shadows of early 16th century espionage. Waldseemüller himself admitted his map relied on the most recent and most exact observations, likely referencing classified reports from Portuguese and Spanish voyages. These were state secrets guarded as fiercely as gold, yet somehow details leaked, perhaps through Italian bankers financing expeditions, or disgruntled sailors trading stories in dockside taverns. The map even hints at unexplored passages below South America, foreshadowing the Strait of Magellan decades before its discovery. This wasn't guesswork. It was cartography as intelligence operation, piecing together whispers from the edges of the known world. But the naming of America is its own tangled tale. Vespucci never asked for the honor. In fact, he likely never saw the map. Some historians argue Waldseemüller's choice was less about Vespucci's accomplishments and more about politics. The map's dedicatory text praises the German merchant family funding the project, suggesting the name might have been a bid for patronage. By 1516, Waldseemüller himself seemed to regret the decision, leaving America off his later maps in favor of terra incognita. Yet the label stuck, spreading through atlases and cementing Vespucci's legacy over Columbus's. It's a reminder that history isn't just written by the victors sometimes, it's drawn by the map makers. What's often overlooked is the map's radical worldview. Breaking with tradition, Waldseemüller presented the Earth as a unified whole, not split into separate hemispheres. His Pacific isn't a blank void but a calculated space, its width eerily close to the actual distance between South America and Asia. Some scholars believe this precision came from indigenous sources, Inca or Taino informants describing lands beyond European horizons. Others point to lost accounts from undocumented voyages, ships that sailed into the unknown and returned with tales too explosive for official records. The Waldseemüller map forces us to confront a provocative idea that the age of discovery wasn't a linear march of progress, but a scramble of secrets, stolen knowledge, and suppressed truths. Every inch of parchment is a palimpsest with layers of information, some celebrated, some hidden waiting to be read between the lines. And if one map could rewrite geography while hiding its sources, how many other breakthroughs might be buried in archives, their origins still waiting to surface? Leonardo da Vinci's maps don't just chart rivers and mountains, they whisper secrets in reverse. His mirrored handwriting, legible only when held up to a looking glass, wasn't just the quirk of a left-handed genius. It was a deliberate act of concealment, a way to guard knowledge from prying eyes. But Leonardo wasn't alone in turning maps into ciphers. Across Renaissance Europe, cartographers embedded hidden symbols, disguised coordinates, and even layered invisible ink beneath innocuous landscapes. These weren't mere artistic flourishes, they were survival tactics in an age when geographic knowledge equaled power, and power was always contested. Take the infamous Cantino planisphere of 1502. This Portuguese world map, smuggled out of Lisbon by an Italian spy, contained coded markers pointing to lucrative spice routes and fortified colonies. To the untrained eye, it was a masterpiece of exploration. To rival nations, it was a treasure map, one they'd kill to possess. The Cantino wasn't unique. Medieval Arab cartographers routinely omitted key ports or distorted coastlines to mislead competitors, while Venetian mapmakers sold deliberately flawed charts to foreign buyers, reserving accuracy for their own merchant fleets. Maps became battlegrounds where truth and deception waged silent war. Then there's the Voynich manuscript, history's most stubborn enigma. Its pages burst with bizarre botanical illustrations and astrological charts, but it's the uncanny maps that haunt researchers most. One depicts a series of islands connected by undulating tubes, labeled in a script that's defied centuries of decryption. Some theorize it's a coded guide to New World herbal remedies. Others believe it traces an alchemical journey through the human body. But the most tantalizing possibility, that it represents a lost language of cartography, a visual lexicon understood only by initiates of some forgotten guild. The Voynich isn't just a puzzle, it's a stark reminder of how much pre-modern knowledge was transmitted through symbols we no longer comprehend. This tradition of cryptographic cartography didn't end with quills and parchment. During World War II, British intelligence printed silk escape maps for pilots, their delicate material chosen because it wouldn't rustle if discovered. Cold War-era CIA maps of Soviet installations hid microdots in seemingly random topographical features, while Soviet cartographers deliberately skewed city grids on public maps to mislead foreign spies. Even today, digital mapmakers embed subtle errors, trap streets that exist only on paper to catch copyright violators. The tools have changed, but the game remains the same. Maps as vessels of truth for some, instruments of deception for others. What's fascinating is how these hidden layers reflect deeper human instincts. Before maps were scientific instruments, they were talismans, objects of power that could guide or mislead, reveal or obscure. The medieval Mappa Mundi placed Jerusalem at the center, not because it was geographically accurate, but because it reinforced a divine worldview. Polynesian stick charts encoded navigational secrets in patterns only trained eyes could read. Every culture has its cartographic ciphers, its ways of saying, this knowledge isn't for everyone. So when we stare at Leonardo's mirrored script or the Voynich's alien glyphs, we're not just seeing puzzles. We're witnessing the age-old dance between transparency and secrecy, between sharing knowledge and guarding it. In a world where Google Earth can zoom into any backyard, it's easy to forget that maps were once living things, breathing documents that could enlighten or betray, depending on who held them. Perhaps that's why these encrypted artifacts still captivate us. They're reminders that every map tells two stories, one of the landscape it depicts, and another of the hands that drew it, hands that sometimes had every reason to lie. The Hereford Mappa Mundi isn't just a map, it's a medieval sermon in ink and parchment. Stretching over 5 feet tall, this 14th century masterpiece transforms geography into theology, plotting biblical events alongside real cities as if time and space were one seamless tapestry. Jerusalem sits dead center, not because it was the midpoint of any measurable continent, but because it was the axis of the Christian cosmos. The Garden of Eden floats at the very top, encircled by a ring of fire, while the Tower of Babel and Noah's Ark nestle among the rivers and mountains of Europe and Asia. Even the Red Sea is painted literal red, a visual echo of the Exodus story. This wasn't cartography as we understand it today. It was an act of devotion, a way to walk through scripture without leaving the cathedral floor. What's striking is how deliberately the map distorts reality to serve its message. Africa shrinks to a narrow strip, while Europe looms large, less a reflection of landmass than of perceived spiritual significance. Monsters lurk at the edges, not just as decoration but as warnings. Here be dragons, yes, but also heresy, chaos, the untamed wilderness beyond God's order. The map's creators knew most viewers would never travel beyond their villages, so they brought the world to them, filtered through the lens of salvation history. Pilgrims could trace the route to Jerusalem with their fingers, or follow Christ's footsteps from Bethlehem to Calvary, all while standing in Hereford's chilly cathedral. This fusion of faith and geography wasn't unique to Christianity. Islamic world maps of the same era, like those by Al-Idrisi, placed Mecca at their heart, with concentric circles radiating outward like prayer ripples. Buddhist mandala maps depicted realms of existence as nested circles, with Mount Meru, the cosmic axis, piercing the center. Even the Aztecs' Codex Fejevari Maya painted the world as a four-petaled flower, each quadrant ruled by a god and aligned with sacred directions. These weren't navigational tools, they were cosmological diagrams answering not, "How do I get there?" but "Where do I belong in the universe?" the Hereford Map's genius lies in its layers. Beneath the saints and sea monsters, it hides practical knowledge, trade routes sketched in faint ink, pilgrimage paths marked with tiny crosses. Medieval scholars understood the earth was round despite the flat parchment. They knew of distant lands from Marco Polo's travels, yet they chose to present the world this way because the map's purpose wasn't to teach longitude or latitude. It was to show life as a journey toward divine truth, with every road ultimately leading back to God. Modern maps pride themselves on objectivity, but the Hereford Mappa Mundi challenges that pride. It reminds us that every map, no matter how scientific, carries the fingerprints of its maker's beliefs. Satellite imagery might strip away the dragons, but it still centers certain perspectives, whether it's the Mercator projection inflating the size of wealthy nations or the arbitrary lines we call borders. The question isn't whether faith still shapes our maps, but how subtly those influences now hide behind grids and algorithms. Perhaps the old mapmakers were more honest. They never pretended their work was neutral. They knew every line drawn was an act of faith. The Cantino planisphere didn't just cross oceans, it crossed enemy lines. Stolen from Portugal's Costa da India in 1502 by an Italian spy known only as Alberto Cantino, this exquisitely detailed chart was no ordinary theft. It was an act of geopolitical sabotage, whisked away to the Duke of Ferrara as proof that Portugal had found lands far beyond Africa's edge, the map's most explosive revelation. The eastern bulge of Brazil, sketched with startling accuracy a full year before Amerigo Vespucci's official discovery. This wasn't just a drawing of coastlines, it was a smoking gun, evidence that Lisbon had breached the Treaty of Tordesillas, the papal decree dividing the New World between Spain and Portugal. Whoever held this parchment held leverage over empires. Espionage and cartography were inseparable in the age of exploration. Venice's secretive Council of 10 maintained an entire department dedicated to stealing nautical charts, while Spanish agents infiltrated Portuguese shipyards to bribe pilots for their rutters' handwritten sailing log. One notorious case involved a Genoese mapmaker who sewed stolen Portuguese charts into his coat lining, only to be caught and hanged in Lisbon's public square as a warning. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A single map could reveal the location of spice islands, gold-rich kingdoms, or safe harbors, knowledge worth more than a shipload of silk. But the Cantino wasn't unique. Across Europe, maps flowed through clandestine networks like contraband. The Waldseemüller map of 1507, which first named America, may have been based on smuggled Portuguese data. The deep maps, crafted in France's premier pirate port, incorporated details from captured Spanish vessels. Even the Piri Reis Map, with its uncanny Antarctica, likely synthesized intelligence from prisoners taken during Ottoman naval raids. These weren't academic exercises, they were acts of intellectual piracy where ink and parchment became weapons of statecraft. What's often overlooked is how these stolen maps reshaped history. The Cantino planisphere didn't just inform Italy, it leaked to German bankers funding rival voyages, accelerating the scramble for the New World. Similarly, when Dutch rebels seized Spanish Portolan charts during their war for independence, they used them to launch their own golden age of exploration, founding colonies from New Amsterdam to Java. Every purloined map redrew the balance of power, proving that in the right hands, geography could be as decisive as gunpowder. Yet the greatest irony lies in the shadows. For all their secrecy, many of these maps survive only because they were stolen. Original Portuguese charts were routinely destroyed to protect trade routes, leaving the Cantino as one of the few intact records of early Brazilian exploration. Sometimes the only way knowledge endures is through betrayal. That's the dirty secret of cartographic history. The maps that changed the world weren't just drawn. They were stolen, smuggled, and fought over, their lines as contested as the lands they depicted. And if a single parchment could ignite empires, how many others still lie hidden, their secrets waiting to be claimed? The Mythology map hangs in the archives of France's National Library like a ghost from another age. Created in 1737 by royal geographer Philippe Mythology, this deceptively simple chart shows a landmass at the bottom of the world, Antarctica, but not as we know it today. Instead of a frozen wasteland, the continent splits into two large islands separated by a wide sea channel, its coastlines eerily matching modern sonar scans of the land beneath the ice. The implications are staggering. Either Mythology made an uncanny guess, or his work preserves fragments of a lost map drawn when Antarctica was last ice-free thousands of years before recorded history. What makes this map so explosive isn't just its accuracy, but its sources. Mythology claimed he based his work on ancient and modern documents, including accounts from early explorers like Abel Tasman. Yet no known 18th century voyage had penetrated deep enough south to chart Antarctica's true shape. Some researchers argue Mythology pieced together clues from forgotten Portuguese or Arab charts, passed down through shadowy networks of scholars and sailors. Others point to his connection with the Cassini family, famed astronomers who had access to Europe's most guarded geographic archives. But the most tantalizing theory, that Mythology's map traces back to the legendary Piri Reis chart, which also depicts an ice-free Antarctica, suggesting both men copied from the same prehistoric source. The controversy deepens when you examine the details. Mythology's Antarctica includes mountain ranges that align with modern subglacial surveys, like the Gambutsev Mountains buried under 2 miles of ice. His hypothesized inland sea mirrors actual geological features, including Lake Vostok, a massive liquid water body sealed beneath the ice for millions of years. These aren't vague approximations, they're specific, testable features that defy coincidence. Charles Hapgood, the historian who reignited interest in the map in the 1960s, argued it proved advanced ancient civilizations had mapped the poles during a warmer climatic period. Skeptics counter that Mythology simply extrapolated from known geography, filling gaps with theoretical symmetry. Yet the map's true power lies in the questions it forces us to confront. If Mythology had access to accurate data, who originally gathered it? The last time Antarctica was ice-free was roughly 34 million years ago, long before humans existed. But during the milder Holocene climatic optimum, around 6,000 years ago, coastal regions might have been temporarily passable. Could some unknown seafaring culture, Atlanteans, as conspiracy theorists suggest, or a lost branch of early maritime explorers, have glimpsed these shores before the ice returned? The lack of archaeological evidence is glaring, but so is the Mythology map's stubborn precision. Modern technology has only amplified the mystery. Satellite radar and gravity mapping projects like NASA's Operation Icebridge have revealed Antarctica's hidden topography in unprecedented detail. And the closer we look, the more Mythology's outlines seem to resonate. His map even hints at the existence of the now confirmed subglacial trenches, vast canyons carved by ancient rivers. It's as if someone, somewhere, once saw this land not as a frozen void, but as a living, habitable world. The debate won't be settled anytime soon. For every scholar who sees the Mythology map as a Rosetta Stone of prehistory, there's another who dismisses it as speculative cartography. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Maps have always been palimpsests, layers of knowledge and imagination pressed onto parchment. Whether Mythology tapped into an ancient tradition or simply got lucky, His work reminds us that the past is never fully erased, just waiting, like Antarctica's buried mountains, for the right moment to be uncovered. And if one map can challenge everything we thought we knew, what other forgotten charts might still be out there, hiding in plain sight? Digital technology is peeling back the centuries like layers of parchment, revealing secrets our ancestors never intended to fade. Take the Tabula Peutingeriana, a medieval copy of an ancient Roman road map so delicate that unfurling it risks turning it to dust. For generations, scholars squinted at its crumbling edges, guessing at place names swallowed by time. Now, multispectral imaging, a technique that captures light wavelengths beyond human vision, exposes ink invisible to the naked eye, resurrecting lost cities and trade routes. It's as if we've been handed a decoder ring for the classical world, one that's rewriting history with every pixel. But the breakthroughs don't stop there. Artificial intelligence has entered the archival vaults, cross-referencing thousands of maps to spot patterns no human could detect. Algorithms trained on Ptolemy's coordinates can now identify subtle distortions caused by medieval copyists, effectively reverse engineering their mistakes to reconstruct the original intent. In Oxford's Bodleian Library, AI recently deciphered a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and reused, uncovering a 9th century Arabic map beneath a Latin theological text. The hidden chart turned out to be a fragment of a lost work by al-Khwarizmi, the Persian mathematician whose name gave us the word algorithm. The irony is delicious. The father of algorithms helps us reclaim his own legacy through the technology he inspired. The real game changer, hyperspectral imaging, which goes beyond multispectral's capabilities by capturing hundreds of light frequencies. This tech has breathed life into the Visconti-Maggiolo map of 1527, where faint annotations under ultraviolet light revealed Portuguese fears of Spanish encroachment in the Moluccas. Suddenly, we're not just seeing geography, we're reading the anxieties of empire. Similarly, LiDAR scans, the same laser technology used to find lost Mayan cities, are exposing erasures on Renaissance maps where rulers ordered cartographers to remove rival kingdoms from history. These digital time machines don't just restore ink, they recover the politics scratched beneath the surface, yet the most profound revelations may come from combining these tools. In Venice, researchers are stitching together fragments of the Fra Mauro map using 3D modeling, creating a virtual reconstruction that lets us explore the 15th century world as its makers saw it. Meanwhile, machine learning analyzes pigment composition to trace trading networks. The Egyptian blue in a Sicilian map might lead us to a forgotten Mediterranean trade route. It's archaeology without a shovel, uncovering connections that redefine our understanding of global exchange. What keeps historians awake at night isn't just what we've found, it's what's still hiding. Less than 10% of the world's ancient maps have undergone advanced imaging. Imagine what secrets lurk in the Vatican's locked cabinets or Istanbul's Topkapi Palace archives. A single overlooked folio might hold the key to a lost civilization's voyages or a phantom island's true coordinates. As these technologies grow cheaper and more accessible, we're on the brink of a cartographic renaissance where every library and attic becomes a potential treasure chest. The past isn't finished speaking, it's just been waiting for us to learn how to listen. Maps don't just show space, they capture time. Layer an ancient chart over a modern one, and suddenly, you're not just seeing streets or coastlines, you're watching history unfold. Take the Augur's map of London, drawn in the 1560s. At first glance, it's a charming snapshot of Tudor life, wooden bridges spanning the Thames, the towering spire of Old St. Paul's, and a labyrinth of alleys untouched by the Great Fire. But compare it to today's satellite images and the real magic begins. The river's curves have been tamed by embankments. The open fields where Shakespeare's audiences once strolled are now concrete grids. Even the city's pulse has shifted, its medieval heart now buried under financial districts. This isn't just cartography, it's archaeology with ink and parchment. The same technique reveals ecological stories. Overlay Dutch polder maps from the 17th century onto modern landscapes, and you'll see how centuries of land reclamation turned swamps into tulip fields. Compare 19th century surveys of the American Midwest to today's farmland, and the stark grid of property lines tells a tale of conquest and cultivation, where prairies gave way to plows. Even the fading trails on Aboriginal songlines, when matched against contemporary Australia, expose how highways and mines have redrawn sacred pathways. These maps aren't static records, they're living chronicles of human ambition and its consequences. Some of the most haunting comparisons come from vanishing coastlines. Venetian maps from the Renaissance show islands and salt marshes that now lie underwater, submerged by rising Adriatic tides. In Louisiana, French colonial charts of the Mississippi Delta depict wetlands that have since eroded into open water, their loss accelerated by canals and oil drills. These overlays do more than measure change, they force us to confront our role in it. When a 1500s map shows a fishing village where there's now open ocean, it's not just geography that's shifted. It's the baseline of what we consider normal. Yet the most provocative question isn't what these maps reveal about the past, it's what they'll say about us. Future cartographers might study today's satellite images with the same curiosity we bring to medieval parchments. Will they trace the retreat of glaciers against our climate projections, note how coastal megacities expanded despite flood warnings, or marvel at the sudden greening of deserts as irrigation systems failed? Maps have always been mirrors, reflecting not just the land but the priorities of those who drew them. Our roads, dams, and deforestation are already inking themselves into the next generation of charts. The only difference is, this time, we're the ones leaving clues for the archaeologists of tomorrow. So the next time you open a map, remember, you're not just holding directions. You're holding a conversation across centuries, one where every line and legend is a whisper from the past and a message to the future. The vast blank spaces on ancient maps weren't just gaps in knowledge, they were invitations. When medieval cartographers scrawled, "Here be dragons," across uncharted waters or sketched towering mountains at the edges of their parchment, they weren't admitting defeat. They were setting the stage for adventure, leaving room for the imagination to roam. Compare that to today's satellite-mapped world, where every inch of the planet is catalogued, measured, and indexed. We've gained unparalleled accuracy, but at what cost? The thrill of the unknown, the tantalizing possibility that something extraordinary might lie just beyond the horizon. That's a magic we've traded for the cold certainty of pixels. Take the vast white expanses of early polar maps, where cartographers like Mercator sketched swirling vortexes and mythical kingdoms like Hyperborea. These weren't lazy omissions, they were conscious choices reflecting a worldview where mystery was as vital as fact. Even the Vikings, some of history's most pragmatic navigators, filled their sagas with tales of lands like Hyperborea, a white men's land rumored to lie west of Greenland. These stories weren't just entertainment, they fueled voyages, pushing explorers to sail farther than logic dictated. The unknown wasn't a void to be feared, it was a canvas for human ambition. Modern maps, for all their precision, often feel sterile by comparison. Google Earth can zoom into your backyard with unsettling clarity. But when was the last time a digital map made you wonder what might lie beyond its borders? The irony is that our ancestors' inaccuracies sometimes reveal deeper truths. The Polynesians, who navigated vast oceans without written charts, understood that blank spaces were as meaningful as marked ones. Their stick maps showed only the essential wave patterns, star paths, leaving the rest to the navigator's intuition. In leaving room for interpretation, they honored the ocean's unpredictability, treating it as a living thing rather than a problem to be solved. This tension between knowledge and mystery isn't just nostalgic, it's psychological. Studies show that humans are drawn to incomplete information, a phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains cling to unresolved questions, turning blanks into obsessions. The old mapmakers knew this instinctively. By leaving spaces unfilled, they turned geography into a story, one where every traveler could imagine themselves the hero. Columbus's crew nearly mutinied, not because they feared falling off the earth, but because the endless, unmapped Atlantic tested their courage. The blank spaces on their charts were as much a part of the journey as the winds and waves. Yet today's obsession with precision comes with its own blind spots. Satellite imagery can't capture the scent of spices on a tropical breeze or the eerie silence of a desert at dawn, the very details that made early explorers' accounts so vivid. Even our digital maps, for all their layers of data, flatten the world into two dimensions, stripping away the textures that once made cartography an art. The Hereford Mappa Mundi might have placed Jerusalem at the center of the earth, but its dragons and angels vibrated with life, reminding viewers that the world was more than dirt and water. Perhaps the real loss isn't the blank spaces themselves, but the humility they represented. Ancient maps acknowledged the limits of human knowledge, leaving room for the extraordinary. When Portuguese sailors finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope, they didn't just find a new trade route, they shattered centuries of assumption, proving the Indian Ocean wasn't landlocked after all. That moment of discovery was possible precisely because the old maps had been wrong. Their emptiness was a dare, so the next time you glance at a map, ask yourself what's missing. Not just unmarked streets or unnamed peaks, but the spaces where wonder still lingers, because sometimes the most powerful thing a map can do isn't to show you the way, but to remind you that there are still paths left to blaze. Ancient maps are more than relics, they're puzzles, propaganda, and portals to lost worlds. Think about the Piri Reis Map with its impossible Antarctica, or the Polynesian stick charts that turned ocean swells into a language of navigation. These weren't just tools, they were testaments to human ingenuity and the audacity to try and capture the infinite complexity of our planet on parchment. Every line inked by a medieval monk or a Ming Dynasty cartographer was a leap of faith, a declaration that the world could be known, even if their understanding was flawed. And isn't that the essence of exploration? Not just the courage to venture into the unknown, but the humility to admit how much you don't yet understand. These maps also expose the stories we tell ourselves. The Hereford Mappa Mundi placed Jerusalem at the center of creation, while the Kangnido map of Korea stretched China's borders to reflect political alliances rather than geography. They weren't lying, they were revealing what mattered most to their makers. Today's maps might seem objective, with their satellite precision and algorithmic accuracy, but they're just as loaded with invisible choices. Why does the Mercator projection still dominate classrooms, inflating the size of wealthy nations near the poles? Why do some maps erase indigenous place names in favor of colonial labels? The more we study ancient charts, the more we see our own biases reflected in their ink. What's truly extraordinary is how these artifacts keep surprising us. Multispectral imaging uncovers erased trade routes on Roman scrolls, while AI reconstructs lost fragments of the Library of Alexandria's geography texts. Each technological leap peels back another layer, proving that these maps weren't static records but living documents, updated and debated by generations. The Mythology map's eerie Antarctic accuracy or the Vinland map's Norse secrets remind us that history isn't a locked vault. It's a puzzle box waiting for the right key. So where does that leave us? Holding these maps is like holding a conversation across centuries. They whisper of Viking sails cutting through North Atlantic fog, of Arab scholars plotting stars over desert observatories, of Inca engineers aligning cities with solstice sunrises. They challenge us to question our own certainty, to wonder what future generations will find quaint or shocking about the maps we trust today. The next time you glance at a GPS screen, take a moment to imagine how it might look to a cartographer from the past. Would they marvel at its precision or laugh at the arrogance of thinking we've finally solved geography? Because the truth is every map, whether drawn on clay, silk, or pixels, is just a snapshot of our best guess at the time. The Earth keeps changing, and so do we. Which mystery will you explore next? The phantom islands that haunted sailors for centuries, the celestial maps that guided builders to align temples with constellations. Or perhaps the coded chart spies risked their lives to steal. The adventure doesn't end here, it's just beginning. Share your thoughts below and keep seeking the unseen. After all, the greatest maps aren't the ones that answer every question. They're the ones that leave room for one more.